This is the 2007 Nissan Sentra SER Spec V, and it's the sport compact that no one cares about. If you are in the market for a cheap, sporty daily driver and you don't mind having to take it to the mechanic once every 2 months, this may be the car for you. And today I'm going to review it and show you all of its odds and ends.
Bing bang!
I've requisitioned this car from a local Walmart parking lot, and first, a quick overview. When you think of sporty yet practical daily drivers sold in the American market, you tend to think of cars such as the Honda Civic Si, the Volkswagen GTI, maybe even the Mazda Speed 3, all of which are fun, sportier versions of their company's respective hatchbacks. And in the early 2000s, Nissan wanted to get in on that action as well. They already had a sport variant of their Sentra sedan, the SER trim, which came with a larger engine and a manual transmission. But that was still boring. So in 2002, they released this, the Spec V variant. When the 6th generation of the Sentra debuted for the 2007 model year, Nissan released a new version of the SER Spec V, which is how this car came to be. Now, even though this car was made specifically to compete with the Honda Civic Si, Nissan was never able to gain a significant foothold in the sport compact market, primarily because there's no such thing as a cool Sentra. And so, when the 6th generation of the Sentra ended in 2012, the SER ended along with it. Nowadays, most people have completely forgotten this car's existence, meaning you can get it for as low as $5,000 or $6,000, which for most people is likely to be the most attractive thing about it. So, let's talk about this car's odds and ends, starting with the styling. And to be frank, this generation of the Sentra isn't really a looker. The 6th generation Sentra is this tall, boxy, geometric thing of a car. It almost appears as if someone took a sedan and a hatchback and Frankensteined them together in the worst way imaginable, without the sleekness or practicality of either style of vehicle. It's just an odd-looking car. Now, for the SER and Spec V, Nissan did make a few styling changes to make the Sentra a bit sportier looking. We have a different front bumper, which contains more aggressive styling cues and a slight front lip. It also contains fog lights, which come standard on the SER and Spec V, as well as what Nissan calls the Sport Grille, which features this hexagonal pattern rather than the standard rectangular grid. The headlights and taillights have been changed as well. They have this black plastic mounting in the assembly rather than the silver found on all other trims. Along the sides, we have extensions to the side sills as well as 17-inch alloy rims. And on the back, we have a chrome exhaust tip and a small spoiler. All of these do help the Sentra appear a bit sportier looking. However, they can only do so much because it's still a 6th gen Sentra. Now, aside from those slight design changes, the only other way to tell that this is not your average Sentra are the hints of SER branding on the car, of which there are only a few. We have the front brake calipers, which are supposed to say SER, but they've started to wear away here, demoting this Sentra to the SE trim. We also have the badge on the back, as you would expect, and that's it. There are no other exterior indicators that this is the SER trim. And if your car is the Spec V, then the badge on the back is the only exterior indicator of your car's trim level. This is actually a very considerate move by Nissan, because it allows for plenty of room for extra SER and Nismo badges and stickers that owners of this car will inevitably be buying, something that all Nissan drivers do. Now, what really sets the SER Spec V apart from other trim levels of the Sentra is its engine. It comes with Nissan's QR25DE engine, which is a 2.5-liter inline-4 that's been tuned up to 200 horsepower and 180 pound-feet of torque. And if you think about it, that's actually quite large for an inline-4. For comparison, the Ford Mustang GT of the same year had a 4.6-liter V8 making 315 horsepower, meaning the Sentra SER Spec V actually beats it in terms of both displacement per cylinder and horsepower per cylinder. The 2000s were certainly a strange decade. It gets about 25 combined miles to the gallon, which is fine. It's about average for this market sector. However, it does come with the downside of requiring premium gasoline. Not exactly ideal for a daily driver. The engine was not the only thing Nissan changed for the Spec V, however. They also added several other upgrades as well. Nissan did extensive testing on the Nürburgring during the development of this car, which, as we all know, always makes cars worse. And it led them to add larger front disc brakes, a sport-tuned suspension, lower body height, and a reinforced chassis, all of which are bad. Now, the Spec V on its own has a sporty enough exhaust note. However, the owner of this Spec V decided to add a MagnaFlow muffler, allowing them to be an even larger menace to society than most Nissan drivers already are. Take a listen. Moving to the trunk of the car, once we open it up, we see we have a fairly standard sized trunk for this type of vehicle. It's not overly large, but it has a good amount of width and depth to it and can easily fit a couple dozen catalytic converters, maybe even a body or two. Now, there are a couple of oddities I would like to point out. For one, this SER embroidery on the bottom allows whoever is riding inside your trunk to know that this is not your average Sentra they're being kidnapped in. Another thing you'll notice is the V-mounted brace, which is part of the chassis reinforcement that I mentioned a minute ago. Now, you would think this poses a slight problem for when you want to move something large. In most cars, you would simply fold the seats down and use the cabin as an extended trunk space, but in the Sentra SER Spec V, the V-brace would get in the way of that. Well, that's actually not a problem in this car because the seats don't fold down at all. The trunk space is all the space you have to move large objects. So hopefully you weren't planning on moving anything too big in your Spec V. And next we move inside the SER Spec V, where one of the first oddities you'll notice are the gauges mounted in the center of the dashboard. You have one that monitors your oil pressure, and the other is a G sensor, which measures how many G's you're pulling while accelerating and braking. It's a very unusual feature, not something you would typically see coming straight out of a factory, and I can't imagine it being all that useful in day-to-day driving, which means it's the perfect modification for a Nissan. Another sporty oddity of the SER Spec V's interior is the SER embroidery. You can find it on the driver and front passenger floor mats, as well as on the driver and front passenger seats. Speaking of which, Nissan provided some slightly sportier seats for the driver and front passenger. We have some bolstering on the side, which allows you to stay comfortably in place as you evade your local police. We also have red stitching along the sides, which complements the red of the SER embroidery. And to finish it off, we have one of my favorite little oddities of the SER Spec V's interior, red seat belts. Yes, normal seat belts simply weren't sporty enough. They had to be red. One more oddity of the Sentra's interior are the cup holders. In the middle of the divider here, you have this little dial, and by turning the dial, you can pop out this bumper, which allows you to adjust the size of the two cup holders. We can choose between 2 small drinks, 2 large drinks, or one of each. Or if you have something extra large that won't fit in the cup holder, you can slide the divider back like this, and now you have room for one more catalytic converter. Speaking of room, one of the few advantages of the Sentra's unusual design is the fact that the cabin is actually quite spacious. I'm a rather tall individual myself, but I still fit comfortably in the Sentra with plenty of legroom and headroom. It has a fairly high seating position for a car of this size, allowing you to easily get in and out of, and visibility is quite good. Now, the same cannot be said for riding in the back seats. There's none of that bolstering, no sporty red seat belts, very little legroom or headroom, not even an armrest. That likely won't be a problem for you though, since no one will want to ride with you anyways, because who the hell wants to be seen riding in a Sentra? And those are the odds and ends of the Sentra SER Spec V. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. Alright, driving the Sentra SER Spec V. What an unnecessarily long name that is. So the first thing I can say about this car is that the ride actually isn't that bad. It's a little firmer than you would get out of most cars, but it's not stiff, it's not uncomfortable. It gives you a good amount of feedback from the road through both the seat and the steering wheel. It's a quite comfortable and enjoyable experience. I can also say that the engine is quite nice too. It's not powerful or fast necessarily, but it is punchy. It's got a good amount of low-end power. It's good. It's a fun ride. Again, not outright quick, not quite as fast as a lot of the other cars in its sector. Its main competitors are typically a little bit faster than it, but it's still an enjoyable ride, and it's got enough power to get you moving. It's punchy. Another thing that heightens the experience is the manual transmission down here. Now, Nissan CVTs in this area were notorious. They were just ticking time bombs, catastrophes waiting to happen. And the Spec V is the only trim of the Sentra to come with a manual transmission, and it's definitely a nice change of pace. It's not quite as crisp as, say, a Honda's, but it's got a good feel to it. It's kind of big, chunky, it's got a good throw, and it's in a nice position right next to the steering wheel, so it's very easy for your hand to go back and forth. I could see this being a good car for someone wanting to learn to drive stick. Ultimately, I can't say this is a car that excels in any one category. I can't say it beats its competitors outright in anything, but it is competent at the very least. There's not anything that it does poorly. It's quite an enjoyable and altogether fun driving experience. This is a decent sport compact car. Ultimately, I think the worst thing about this car is the fact that it's a Nissan Sentra, and this is not a bit. You look at the Sentra's competitors, the Mazda 3, the Honda Civic, the Volkswagen Golf. Those are cars that still, at their base trim, are still quite fun to drive. They are enjoyable driving experiences straight out of the factory, and their sport variants simply elevate what is already quite a positive experience. The Nissan Sentra is not that. At a base level, it is a very boring, bland car. It is a people mover and very little else. It is the epitome of a poor, bland driving experience, a vehicle as a tool, and not even a very good one. It doesn't help that in this era, Nissan was not known for making particularly quality cars. They often felt cheap or were just flat out unreliable, and the SER Spec V is no exception to that. Everything about this car feels cheap. The dials feel cheap, the buttons feel cheap, the levers feel cheap, the material of the dash and the trim feels cheap. The steering wheel looks like it's been sitting in the sun for 30 years. It's not a very quality experience inside this car. It's disappointing that even their highest end Sentra, their sportiest sport compact, still feels like a parts car. And even though this is still a fun driving experience that doesn't get a whole lot wrong, as a car, it still doesn't really get a whole lot right. I would love to be able to recommend this car because it is a very fun and practical daily driver. However, it's also a Nissan, and that means it sucks. And so that's the Nissan Sentra SER Spec V. This is a great car if you have no budget and no integrity. In other words, if you like Nissans. It's unreliable, undeniably cheap, inherently boring, and anyone attracted to it is more than likely clinically insane. It's a truly stupid car for truly stupid people. And now it's time to give it a Dray score. And the Dray score is this: zeros across the board. The 6th generation Sentra is an incredibly bland car, and no amount of tinkering or modifications can save it in any way. Nissan only makes bad cars, and anyone who likes this car is dumb and likes sucking big pee-pee. Seriously, just buy a Civic.